This week on Christian World News, ending the forever war. As the U.S. gets set to pull out of Afghanistan, some are asking, could it mean a resurgence for al-qaida?
Plus, she was once a Muslim, trapped in an abusive marriage and a restrictive regime. So how did this woman lead 1,500 Muslims to Christ?
And more than 1 million responses to the gospel message. Our Good Friday broadcast is changing lives across the globe. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. America is ending its 20-year war in Afghanistan. President Biden pulling out all U.S. troops by September 11th, 2 decades after the terror attack that started it all.
The big question, though, once the U.S. withdraws, will ISIS and al-qaida come roaring back? Charlene Aaron has this look at the enormous consequences.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made a surprise visit to Afghanistan today to sell the country's leaders and a concerned public on President Biden's plan to pull American troops from the country. The visit comes a day after the president said the 9/11 attacks could no longer justify U.S. forces staying there.
We went to Afghanistan because of a horrific attack that happened 20 years ago. That cannot explain why we should remain there in 2021.
The pullout plan calls for all American forces, numbering some 2,500, to be withdrawn by September 11th, the anniversary of the attacks, which were coordinated from Afghanistan.
War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked. We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives.
But Republicans like Senator Lindsey Graham oppose withdrawing the troops, saying it could lead to the comeback of terrorism.
Again, there are no great outcomes, but this is the worst possible outcome, is to pull up and leave and hope that things will turn out well. That did not happen in Iraq, and it did not happen here.
Foreign terrorists will not leave the United States alone simply because our politicians have grown tired of taking the fight to them.
But the president disputes that claim, saying the U.S. will prevent the reemergence of terrorists in the region. Regardless of the criticism, President Biden has made his decision, and the U.S. will be out of Afghanistan within 5 months. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. The world's more than 1 billion Muslims are observing their holy month of Ramadan. The season of purification and devotion is marked by fasting food and drink from sunrise to sunset. In the evening, followers come together to break the fast with a community meal. While some COVID restrictions remain in place, celebrations are more open than last year when mosques were closed and the meals limited to family members only.
David Garrison is Executive Director of Global Gates, a ministry to bring the gospel to unreached people groups. He's also author of the book, A Wind in the House of Islam, How God is Drawing Muslims Around the World. David, thank you for coming on the broadcast. As Muslims celebrate Ramadan, Christians across the world are praying for them. Why pray for Muslims during this very holy month for them?
Well, George, everything begins with prayer. And when I did my research, traveling 250,000 miles through the Muslim world, investigating movements of at least 1,000 in each community of Muslims who've been baptized, come to faith in Jesus Christ, what I discovered was that this remarkable surge in movements toward Jesus Christ coincided with the beginning of 30 days of prayer for the Muslim world 28 years ago this year.
So how should Christians pray specifically for Muslims during this time?
Well, we know that's not always the easiest thing. If you don't have familiarity with the Muslim world, with their religion, their community, you may not know how to pray. So we have collaborated with a good friend and partner over at worldchristian.com. That's Paul Felitas, who's been for the past 28 years producing and distributing across North America a little prayer guide called 30 Days of Prayer for the Muslim World Prayer Guide. And this year, Global Gates is partnering with him by offering a free copy, a downloadable electronic copy of the prayer guide to anyone who will visit our website. It's globalgates.info/30 days. Click on that site. We'll be happy to send you a free copy so that you can follow every day and know exactly who you're praying for. how to pray not only for Muslims around the world, but for Muslims right here in our own backyard in global gateway cities like New York, Houston, Detroit, Los Angeles, and so forth.
Yeah, and obviously for Christians, there is some familiarity because we also take part in 40 days, for example, of prayer and fasting. So it's very familiar to us as believers. Describe the impact of this prayer movement.
Well, it's something that I didn't initially detect. I traveled around the world, interviewed more than 1,000 Muslim background believers who had been baptized and were now radiant followers of Jesus Christ. I asked them this question. I said, what did God use to bring you to faith in Jesus Christ? And honestly, not a single one of them told me, well, it was because some sweet lady back in Des Moines, Iowa was praying for my salvation. See, they didn't know. But when I would come back from my surveys, and I did this over a 3-year period, I would come back home and sit down with my friend Paul, and I told him about these movements that we're seeing. Probably 84% of all the movements that have ever happened in history have happened in the last 30 years. And that was when Paul looked at me and said, David, that's when we began 30 days of prayer for the Muslim world. And we realized that even though Muslims around the world may not know that we're praying, God in heaven knows. And as he promised, our prayers are tearing down strongholds. They're opening up hearts. And they're aligning us as Christians with God's desire for the Muslim world to know his son, Jesus Christ.
Okay, terrific. We'll have to leave it there. David, thank you so much for all you are doing. David Garrison with Global Gates.
Brother.
Thank you for
God
coming on.
bless you.
You're welcome. Wendy?
Well, a growing number of Muslim women are turning to Christ, including one who escaped an abusive marriage and an Islamic regime. She's now leading Muslims to Jesus in Sweden. Our Dale Hurd brings us her remarkable story from Stockholm.
No one would have thought a Muslim woman in Iran simply trying to stay alive in an abusive marriage would one day lead 2 churches in Sweden, lead more than 1,000 former Muslims to Christ, and be invited to speak before the Queen of Sweden. As a young woman in a Muslim culture, Anahita Parsan was powerless and insignificant. Her only hope was that she might one day find a good husband, and she did. But he died suddenly in an accident, and she found herself trapped in a second marriage so violent she expected to die.
I didn't know anything. It was darkness. It was a very bad life.
Although she writes about the abuse in her book Stranger No More, Parsan doesn't like to talk about it.
It's not easy about speak about that.
You were beaten with a shovel.
Yes.
As a battered wife, living with bruises and cuts all over her body, Parsan eventually tried to kill herself with pills, but she was revived at a hospital. Anahita's daughter Roxana remembers when her dad threatened to slit her throat when she was just a small child.
I remember we had gotten cookies. My mom baked cookies, so we got cookies. And then we went for another turn, like we wanted more cookies. Super normal. And we ran up and we're like, more cookies, more cookies. And he came up with a knife, put it to my throat, and he said, ask for cookies again. She was striving to just survive for us, just survive to make a better life for us. And maybe that was something God had implanted in her so that she would have something to hold on to.
Anahita Parsan's journey to Christ and across 2 continents is the stuff of Hollywood movies, and one that would include several brushes with death. Parsan, her husband, and 2 children fled Iran through the mountains to Turkey in 1984, where she and Roxana faced more brushes with death before landing in Turkey's notorious Agri prison. They would finally make it to Denmark, where she divorced her still abusive husband, and she heard the gospel for the first time. Then she moved to Sweden, where she and her 2 children would walk into a church and announce that we are Christians from now on. Anahita entered the ministry in 2012 and has led more than 1,500 Muslims to Christ. She not only leads 2 churches, but trains other churches on how to reach and disciple former Muslims like these, who fill her church each Sunday, hungry for the God who loves. Parsan believes this was foretold in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 39. But in the latter days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord.
It is about Elam, and Elam is Persian. When I read that, I know it. It's about us. It's about our life. And it's amazing. God told Jeremiah that time, and it's happened just now.
But Muslim immigration has also made Sweden a home for dangerous radicals. And Parson told us she's received death threats and lives with the knowledge she could be killed.
It's a free country, but it's dangerous too.
Were you saying that sometimes you wonder if it's your last day?
Sometimes.
As a young woman living what seemed like a hopeless existence in Iran, Anahita Parson saw no plan and no purpose in her abusive marriage, only random violence. But God had a plan for her to one day be a leading pastor in Sweden.
I think God loved me, and He was in my life from the beginning. He's my everything. I think it's, wow, it's beautiful.
Dale Hurd, CBN News in Stockholm, Sweden.
Coming up, the gospel preached to 184 countries in 39 languages. Hear how the responses are flooding in.
Hello, this is Pat Robertson. As I look back over my 90 years, I see a life of ongoing excitement filled with loving God and seeing His power at work. I've written a book called I Have Walked with the Living God, telling about the wonderful things that have happened to me. It's my hope that it will lead you to a deeper understanding of God and inspire you to set a course to serve Him.
In Pat's dynamic latest book, you'll learn how to receive favor, wisdom, and discernment, how to overcome obstacles, and live a life that is exhilarating and full of promise.
I believe this book will help you step into your future, ready to trust God and receive His blessings in your life. Nothing can compare to a life lived for God's glory and purpose.
Call now or go to cbn.com to receive your copy today. As the world watches from the outside,
it's a big diplomatic tug-of-war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel. Nutrition, exercise, essential oils, weight loss, and more. It's Healthy Living with Lori Johnson.
Talk about what's in this.
Join CBN health reporter Lori Johnson to get the latest information from today's top health experts.
This is fantastic.
Find out what you need to know to live a healthier life. Watch Healthy Living Tuesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Folks, welcome back to Christian World News. A gospel event broadcast worldwide on Good Friday is reaping fruit across the globe. Pulse, the millennial evangelism movement, reports more than 1.3 million responses to the gospel message presented by its broadcast. The event, by the way, translated into 39 languages, reached a projected 200 million people in 186 countries and 24 territories. Tens of thousands of churches and organizations, such as the Billy Graham Association, Crew, and CBN News, helped spread the awesome message.
International evangelist Nick Hall is the founder of Pulse, and he joins us now for more. Nick, welcome to Christian World News.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Well, tell us, what can you tell us about these responses to the Good Friday broadcast?
Yeah, it's been overwhelming. You know, this is really in Ephesians 3:20, exceedingly and abundantly more than we could ask or imagine. People around the world are hurting. We all know that, whether it's the riots happening in America, whether it's quarantines that are still in effect in parts of Asia and Europe, where COVID is continuing to ravage populations, in as many as 500,000 a day, new cases in India right now. And yet, as people are on lockdown or as people are asking these questions, we're just seeing an unprecedented hunger for the gospel. Even this morning, I got reports from Uganda, over 1 million people tuning in, watching the broadcast there, even pictures of people in beauty salons where the salon was like shut down and people are watching from their chairs.
Wow.
And just reports of lives being changed, Jesus rescuing people at their point of need.
Nick, what kind of follow-up is happening with these new converts?
Absolutely. So we really take this super seriously. We believe that Jesus told us to go and make disciples, not decisions. And so one of the things that we set out to do from the beginning this year is to work in partnership with the local church, missions agencies, and to come alongside people wherever the gospel was going to be broadcast. We wanted to make sure we had follow-up materials in every language, and then had the chance to connect with people, even if it was through digital, text, email, many places there's call centers. So when you see a number over 1 million people responding, that takes an army. And so the good news is through technology, through partnerships with ministries, church planting networks, agencies that do digital real-time responses. So you can imagine over that Easter weekend and even the week after, people have been having email dialogues, text exchanges. People have been having house meetings, following up with each and every one. That's why we even have these numbers, is because we know the exact number of people that have called in or texted in. These people are responding to Jesus. They're saying, we want God in our lives. We're trying to meet them, to pray for them, to offer counsel or comfort. I mean, some of the stories are people considering suicide. Some of them have been in abusive relationships. I just read a report this morning of a guy named Raymond. His wife was having an affair. He called in distraught because he was planning to kill his wife. And yet in the midst of this, he kind of had the chance to talk to the counselor, repent of what's going on. Actually, his wife came home. She got on the phone. She then repented. And they then said, man, we're going to try to make our marriage work. We want Jesus at the center of this. And so you just don't know the stories, but we know that God is at work and the church is the answer and the church is on the move.
Wow, what exciting times to be an evangelist, and wow, 1.3 million responses. That is incredible. Well, Nick Hall, thanks so much for that update. We appreciate it. Look forward to having you back with us. God bless you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Up next, Russian troops amassing on the border of Ukraine. Is an invasion imminent? We'll answer that question.
From Washington, D.C., uncompromising stories, interviews, and analysis from veteran journalists David Brody.
It's a 50-50 deadlock pretty much in the Senate.
Jenna Browder.
Meanwhile, doctors believe the newly discovered California variant is behind a massive wave of new cases.
Ben Kennedy.
He is sworn in as the 46th president.
Bringing you the political news that matters.
We're people who are committed to protecting the most weakest and the most vulnerable.
Watch Faith Nation, weeknights at 6.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
He founded a global ministry, interviewed world leaders, was a leading presidential candidate, and he has walked with the living God. In Pat Robertson's latest book, discover the principles that guided this extraordinary life and how they can shape your future. When you become a CBN partner, we'll send you your copy of the highly acclaimed book, I Have Walked with the Living God. Call now.
In eastern Ukraine, the years-long conflict between Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian forces is heating up.
Moscow has amassed troops, tanks and artillery along its shared border with Ukraine in recent weeks, prompting concerns in Washington and European capitals about Russia's ambitions.
Folks living along Ukraine's border with Russia are once again bracing for possible war.
People in eastern Ukraine are really scared.
Michael Cherenkov with the Christian group Mission Eurasia just returned from the front line. Mission Eurasia runs several bread-making facilities in the war zone. Cherenkov says recent violence between Ukrainian soldiers and Russian-backed separatists has everyone there on edge.
They expect Russian invasion anytime.
Moscow has reportedly massed more than 80,000 troops in recent weeks along Ukraine's eastern border. Peter Dickinson with the Atlantic Council tells CBN News the world should be concerned about Russia's deployment of tanks, artillery, and armored personnel carriers.
The build-up is certainly designed to give the impression that Russia is prepared to launch a major offensive.
Ukraine's president, following a recent tour with soldiers on the border, urged Russia to pull its troops back. Stephen Pfeiffer, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, tells CBN News that Moscow's tactic is to scare the government in Kiev and also test the West's reaction.
This is basically Russian saber rattling designed to unnerve Kyiv. The Russians do this periodically, although this is quite different in terms of the scale.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressing concern about Russia's troop buildup.
We have real concerns about Russia's actions on the borders of Ukraine. There are more Russian forces massed on those borders than at any time since 2014. The question is Russia going to continue to act aggressively and recklessly? If it does, the president's been clear, there'll be costs.
The White House, however, not saying whether the U.S. would intervene if Moscow launched an invasion. Still, 2 U.S. Navy destroyers are headed to the Black Sea as a warning to Russia.
Ukrainian forces and Russia-backed separatists have been fighting in eastern Ukraine since Moscow's 2014 annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. More than 14,000 people have died in the conflict as efforts to reach a peace agreement have stalled.
Meanwhile, Cherenkov's group remains in the war zone, helping not only feed the hungry, but also share the gospel with those living on the front lines.
We encourage local people to trust God, to pray, and that's our Christian message, just to turn their hearts toward God and Jesus Christ.
George, you've been to this region.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the people in the church there?
They're struggling. I mean, this has been going on since 2014. I mean, they're dealing with sniper fire. They're dealing with, explosions going off. But, we need to pray for the folks who are living both on the Russian side as well as the Ukrainian side.
All right. Thanks for keeping us up to date on that. And when we come back, a rare find in Jerusalem, the latest discovery, bringing the Gospels to life right after this.
Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the work of your Spirit, Lord God, with this movement of getting the Bible,
yes,
Lord, into public schools.
Watch The Prayer Link. Tuesday morning at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Wednesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
From Marine Lieutenant in the Korean War to building a global ministry, Pat Robertson reveals how God has directed him every step of the way. In his latest book, I Have Walked with the Living God, Pat Robertson shares his personal journey of faith and how an ordinary life can become extraordinary when surrendered to God. In this highly acclaimed book, you'll learn the keys to receiving daily favor, wisdom, and blessing. how to overcome setbacks and lean on God, how you can hear from God in your own life. Plus, enjoy fascinating untold stories from Pat's experiences in business and the political spotlight. Discover how life with God can be exhilarating and full of promise. Get your copy of I Have Walked with the Living God when you become a CBN partner. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com.
Folks, finally this week, a major renovation at Jerusalem's Tower of David has led to a rare discovery.
My goodness.
It's always happening.
As Chris Mitchell reports, this represents another example of modern-day Israel bringing both ancient history and the Gospels to life. Take a look.
Those who enter the Old City through the historic Jaffa Gate are welcomed by the visually striking Tower of David Museum. Here at the Tower of David Museum, they discovered the foundations of King Herod's palace. These stairs lead down to the pools of his elaborate complex. And many historians and theologians believe it was at this palace that Jesus was brought before King Herod and Pontius Pilate.
Right near us, the excavation of the Kishle, you can find the foundation of this palace. We have the pool, the foundation, the Fatzael Tower. So we probably know that Jesus was here during his time in Jerusalem.
And it was here that renovations led to the discovery of this rare silver Tyre coin.
This is a very strong coin, very heavy silver. That's why it's so rare. Jerusalem is full of treasures, and this is one of them.
This coin was likely used to pay the temple tax during the reign of King Herod. Elat Lieber, the director of the museum, told CBN News the discovery brings the story of the Gospels alive.
And we know from the Gospels that Jesus visited Jerusalem, and we know that he talked to the money changers. So here we have the evidence, the archaeological evidence, to the historical sources.
Another major part of the renovation is the Faisal Tower built by King Herod. Yotam Carmel heads up the conservation project.
It's important nationally, I think internationally, and also personally, but to really touch this kind of structure, moving for me, trying to preserve something and actually let it live on for future generations, and actually to do the best which is possible to keep as much original fabric as possible.
Carmel says the work Herod envisioned and ordered is exquisite.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's hard to understand how they lift, how they build, and how long it will last. I mean, it will last for thousands of years more. Unbelievable building system. Hard to get your mind around it, how it was done. It was just a massive scale of stone carving and building, which is very rare to see.
Chris Mitchell, the Tower of David Museum, Jerusalem.
Always something new.
Always
discover.
something new. Every
something
week.
old, but then something new.
You're so smart. Folks, I'm George Thomas.
You are indeed. All right, I'm Wendy Griffith. Thanks so much for being with us today. From all of us here at Christian World News, have a great weekend and goodbye.